Hello everyone, my name is Bernice Asein. I'm a fashion lawyer based in Lagos, Nigeria, and I'm excited to be on the Just for Women platform.
Can you tell us about your journey into law and what inspired you to specialize in fashion law?
Okay, so I started out in the industry as a designer, right? Growing up, it was something that I was passionate about, just making clothes. However, after that, I moved into uni. I gained admission to study law, but I did stop sewing. I continued to, right? I was making clothes for my friends, just selling outfits and all of that. However, there was just constant conversation about whether wanted to be a designer full time or I wanted to be a lawyer. But, after being called to bar, it was, and then also networking around the industry. I found that I was listening to industry conversation and, it struck me that the value chain of the fashion industry, the ecosystem is actually very big, right? And then various players that was needed to actually accelerate the growth of the fashion industry and lawyers were part of it. And I felt like being a designer would just be joining the packs. I mean, there's nothing bad about being a designer, but like I wanted to bring something different to the table, and fashion law was it for me, right? So I also, you look at it because I started a law firm straight out of NYSC and I was dealing with creators, working with designers, but it was just a conversation about trying to educate them about the right that they needed. And I thought that, okay, fashion law, I could focus on it as a practice area. And here we are, you know, doing what we said we're going to do.
What challenges did you face whilst establishing yourself in this niche, and how did you overcome them?
So the challenges were, I think, two of it. One, getting people to realize that law was important. I feel like Nigerians, Africans, we have a very different and funny attitudes towards the law, right? You do not understand the power of the law. And I really don't blame, us. It was because of the way that we've seen the society turn out. But it's dealing with them to adopt the fact or understand the fact that for us to actually organize and be self-organizing as an industry, we have to use the instrumentality of the law. Law exists as a tool, right, to create an enabling environment. So it was difficult to get people to understand that, the law can actually solve a problem in the fashion industry. And that's because obviously they were not self-organizing or like other professions, right? You see that for lawyers, I definitely know that every lawyer in Nigeria is a member of the Nigerian Bar Association. But for a designer to identify all of them, it was difficult. So it made it difficult for us to sort of like preach our gospel of fashion law, right? So that was one of the problems. And also, we have a mindset towards a very funny mentality towards fashion. I mean, fashion is one of the important things that a mankind you have is functional, right? Everybody should wear clothes, but people do not really understand it beyond that. It's almost like, why should I pay for somebody's intellectual property at the price that we put on it, right? It's not just a dress, it's just a shoe. So it's difficult sometimes to get them to understand that this is somebody's intellectual property and can be monetized and be protected, and they can exclusively have that rights to, produce that. So it's very, very difficult dealing with the mindset of Nigerians towards the fashion industry and its creation, and also just putting together. I remember when we were setting up the Fashion Law Institute, it was quite difficult and challenging to explain to the authorities that fashion and law can actually be in the same sentence together. It was like we had to advocate. How do you explain law that's a different by a very professional in quotes, industry and sector with fashion? How do you put this together? It doesn't really make sense, right? So it was a conversation that we had to have, but eventually, they saw reasons with us and they, granted us our license to operate or approval to operate here. So it's just fighting those things, fighting adoption for people to accept us as, what we are, basically fashion lawyers.
How does intellectual property law play a role in protecting fashion brands and designs?
There's a lot of work that goes in creating a particular design, a lot of research, a lot of financial, implications. Basically, some designers don't just sit down to come up with designs. They research, they go back in time. They invest so much in research and development to come up with a particular design, study trends, do a trend analysis. It's not easy to come up with things that people would like and buy and accept, right? So, from you to enjoy the labor of your work a certain law acts exists to guarantee that you're going to get or reap the fruit of your labor. And that's why intellectual property laws exist, to help designers and creators enjoy the fruit of their people, why other people have access to it. It's almost like saying that we're going to protect you. You'll be the sole owner of that particular, item that you've created. However, we will give it to the public so that they can utilize, right? So people really do not understand that concept. IP law exists to protect also, you know, the country basically and what you use. I mentioned earlier about geographical indications, right? To show that a particular product is coming from a particular angle, right? It's an indicator of the source where it is coming from to give recognition of what they have put in place, right? So it's very important because if you don't do that, then designers will be creating for creator's sake because it will create and then it can be replicated. They can come up with counterfeits and it really cannot keep the funds to create again. So IP law exists to encourage creativity, also exists to actually compensate the creators for actually putting this work together. So it's very, very important to the fashion industry because we've seen that we have suffered enough. We've suffered a lot from actually not benefiting from our own creation, and other people would be, the benefit of that. And we see that we don't have big brands that have stood the test of time because they've not actually seen or reaped the fruits of their labor, so to speak. Because once they come up with a particular design, it's either replicated by somebody else and then it's all over the market, and then the creator itself is less stranded. And how do you encourage them to do that again? It's because you can see the financial implication of that and also get recognition. The problem with also the problem with that we have with infringement here is that it's not that they infringe on those brands and then they put their names. For example, Bernice created a fashion brand and I created a design. Everybody knows that that's Bernice design. So even when you're replicating it, it is sold under a Bernice but a fake. But in Nigeria, it's quite different because you see that other people will put their branding money. So you're not even enjoying any benefit from even the counterfeit itself. Because sometimes you see internationally, you're like, let them, duplicate our products. They probably will put it on our name and it's making us popular. But here, you can't even trace the founders of these designs because again, you see that other people would, duplicate and create knockoffs under a different brand entirely. So it's very important. IP is very, very important to the fashion industry and to the creative economies for us to actually fully reach our potential. We need our creators to be protected and be enjoying because again, as an investor, right? I want to be sure that when I'm investing in a particular creative, I would be able to keep my front back because they own that IP that we're exploiting. But for here, we don't see that happen. And that's why we can see that the fashion industry is suffering from stunt-dead growth, so to speak, because they don't have that financial wherewithal to actually pull through. And that's because the IP obviously is being infringed on day by day.
How do you think the legal landscape in Nigeria supports or hinders the growth of the fashion industry?
Currently, the current landscape encourages and have intellectual property laws that protects designers. And also there is also and that's the bare minimum, to be honest. There's the trademark law, there's the patent and design, there's copyright law that all protect designers, right? And there's also the courts, especially earmarked for that. That's the Federal High Court for IP infringement issues. So there's a pathway to actually, go to court and enforce your rights that exists and that supports creatives. But on the other divide, right, in terms of discouragement, you would see that whatever exists right now is not sufficient for the fashion industry. We need more, right? For example, the Federal High Court is the court in charge of IP related issues. The Federal High Court obviously is in charge of several other issues apart from IP, right? What that means is that they are charged with a lot of work, right? And IP is not exactly at the top of it. So the time frame that someone would use, or when you want to try to estimate to a designer that has been infringed, their rights have been infringed upon, when we try to do the timeline to get judgment when you initiate it, it's very long, right? In fact, unpredictable, basically. So it's difficult. It sort of like discourages a lot of designers to even go to court when your IP is infringed. It's almost like, the stress, the cost of it, the timeline, even if you're going to be at a course, the timeline is so far off, right? After 5 years, we're still going to be in court over this particular matter. so I know how to do it. As against, having specialized courts that deals with this strictly. There's also the fact that the judges right now may not necessarily understand the fashion industry and the landscape. How do you explain to a judge that this fine line is different from the next line, right? So there's also that knowledge gap of the fashion industry. So in my mind, I would think that that actually discourages, designers to go to court and utilize the current framework that exists. And a lot of improvement can also be done on that particular act. So yes, it encourages it because the bare minimum has been done, put in place for you to actually seek redress and also you be protected. But if you want to actually now go and seek redress, you see that there's a lot of loopholes in access to justice and the timeline of delivery of justice itself. So it's quite dicey when you look at it.
How do you stay up to date on the latest trends and legal developments in both fashion and law?
The fashion industry is, by implication, international and in media, constantly in the news. So, of course, there are a lot of organizations and agencies that churn out fashion news. Everyone's paying attention to the media, paying attention to, you know, I think internationally, we have done a lot of work in pushing out fashion news, right? And not just fashion in terms of died and fashion or fashion business news itself. You can see that there's a major acquisition happening. You can see that there's a takeover happening. There's a sale of a brand, different things like that. You see that from the news internationally. So yes, I follow the news a lot. And there are a lot of specialized organizations that actually deal with specific issues as related to the fashion industry, right? There's also the Ellie McCracken Foundation that, focus so much on solely on sustainability and you have a lot of work and paper that they release on sustainability in the fashion space. So yes, of course, that's also a platform. So there are many other platforms internationally, and at Fashion Law Institute, we also try as much as possible to churn out news that are business related to fashion industry in Nigeria as well as we see them come out, and in Africa, we try to follow that news because it exists. But sometimes it's because people are not necessarily interested in those kind of things. You just want to see the glitz and glamour of the red carpet and like businesses and your collections. But for us, we try to churn out specific news that that exist already in the landscape from fashion businesses. So yes, I mean the news basically. And then also listening to clients talking about collaborations that are happening here and there. And from the deals also that we do, we get to hear what's happening in the industry.
What are some common mistakes fashion entrepreneurs make when it comes to legal matters?
So the first one is not being legally conscious. I'm not saying get a lawyer right now, just being very conscious of the kind of decisions you're making concerning your business. How are you protecting your IP? Most brands go unregistered, right? Your trademarks are not registered. They release their collection. This is very popular. Releasing your collection without exactly having, a legal analysis to identify the asset that exists in that collection. What exactly can we protect before we release this to the public? Those conversations, most likely, they're gonna have it. Contracts. They enter into contracts without thinking about the implications of the terms, on their business. They just, look at it and it looks good, right? It's fine. It's okay, my money is guaranteed. But you don't know that, some terms can actually exist to prevent them or stop them from actually enjoying the benefit of this contract. So yes, contracts, not protecting their IP, not, looking at their brand and identifying what their IP really is. So what IP exists. So yes, sort of like the things that I see that really happen that you don't actually do. And then also collecting investment without really doing due diligence on their investors, just collecting a lot of money and not exactly putting in structures to say that this is how much percentage that you get. Because a lot of people want to invest in the angel investors want to invest in businesses in the fashion industry. However, they're not looking at the fine print as to what they want to get from them in exchange of equity or in exchange of that money. So yeah, contracts, IP protection, right? To find your assets. These are mistakes I agree that we make. I've seen that we make.
Why is it important for fashion designers to trademark their brands and designs?
I think it's very important to trademark your brand name because obviously your business is your investment. You're pouring in your time, your effort into an entity. You want to be sure that at the end of the day, I own it. And how do you guarantee ownership of a brand? It's through your trademark protection, not even your CAC registration or your corporate registration, depending on what it's called in different parts of Africa, right? your trademark guarantees you ownership of that particular name and entity. So you want to be sure that whatever you are doing or you're investing in belongs to you and is not infringing on a already existing trademark. And truth is, fashion brands are international by implication, and I like to say that other brands are also evolving and have access to register their trademark in any country, right? And there's no limitation as to who can register their trademark in any country. So just like when you're starting your brand, yeah, somebody else abroad is thinking about registering in that particular country. So it's very important to understand that your competition is not only local, it's also international, right? So it's important that you are actually identifying what your IPs are and you're protecting it almost immediately, because people are actually saying that you're building a brand and may actually go and register it after you. I can also start a business with that because we've seen that you already have like brand equity or you already enjoy a certain level of fame. So it's very important that you actually protect your trademark and identify what your IPs are and see what other laws exist to protect them under it. So yeah, it's very, very important to register their trademark.